Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today it is time for week 16 picks for the Overwatch League's 2022 season. Second week of the Summer Showdown qualifiers, and it is the first weekend for the Summer Showdown where we have the Eastern Region, APAC Region teams playing, so lots of fun storylines and stuff to dive into this week. So let's jump in. Let's get into the first match of the weekend, which of course will be in the APAC region. On Friday, the Guangzhou Charge take on the Shanghai Dragons. This will be a fun game to watch. Obviously, the Guangzhou Charge, very new roster right now. Only 3 pieces retained from the roster they had in the first half of the season. Krong, Choi Se-won, and Farway, who they added, of course, right before the season started. This roster with Xerneas, formerly Yveltal, Aprita, and Jimmy coming in. Very different roster. It'll be a very interesting one to watch. I think they should look better with this new lineup. Shanghai is going to be an interesting spot because we don't necessarily know exactly what they're going to run, what they're going to look like. If I had to guess, they are going to opt to run Who Are You Genji and probably Lip on the Sojourn and Ashe. I don't think Fleta will play that role. That doesn't really make sense, so I would imagine it's going to be that. The tank role is going to be interesting to see who they go with between Void and Fate. And if I'm being completely honest with you, in the Junker Queen meta, where Junker Queen plays very, very similar to a lot of DPS heroes, I will not write off the possibility that they put Fleta in on the Junker Queen. It's not out of this world. It's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't really know what to expect from the Dragons. They're an interesting team in this case. I don't think the meta favors them necessarily as well as it would with a different tank. So I'm intrigued to see what happens, but I think talent-wise, the Dragons are still superior to the Charge. I still think that the Dragons should be favored. They should have the edge just purely based on talent. And so I'm going to give the edge to the Dragons in this one. I'm going to say 3-1. I don't necessarily think it'll be a close series, but Charge had a new roster, new pieces that I think are very, very good. They have some experience playing contenders already, getting to play the new meta a bit, so I could see them doing a little bit competitively, but I think the Dragons are better, and I think they will take it 3-1. Moving on, we have a very early big pick game. This week, Hangzhou Spark take on the Seoul Dynasty. This one is a rematch from their meeting in the Mid-Season Madness, where they met in the Mid-Season Madness. It was a pretty one-sided game. Hangzhou Spark won that one 3-0. And this is going to be an interesting matchup between these two teams now because obviously it's a different meta. And how do you feel about these teams going into this meta? I think this meta right now from what we've seen definitely favors your Genji and your Junker Queen. I think those are the two most important heroes right now in this meta. They seem to be the ones that the game has really been centered around over the past week. And really those are the kind of heroes that if you look at a team like New York, for example, I definitely think having Onsoon Jae come in on the Lucio was very, very important, but a lot of their win against the Houston Outlaws came down to Yaki being able to pop off in Genji and Kellen's Junker Queen looking very, very good. They were better on those two roles, and I think that made all the difference, really. So I think Spark Dynasty is an interesting series to look at because I don't necessarily know what to expect from these two teams who haven't played yet in this meta. When it comes to DPS, I surprisingly give the edge right now to the Spark. I think that ATVI has been incredible this season, and his Genji in the kickoff clash was very, very good. And if Ashe and Sojourn are the other picks, Shy is arguably the best Ashe and Sojourn in the league, so you have a really solid top-tier Genji and arguably the best Ashe and Sojourn player in Shy, so I think they have the edge there. Tank will be interesting. Obviously, Smurf, a very talented player. A lot of similarities to Roadhog in this meta, but when the Shock won in 2020, when the Shock won in 2020, it was not on the back of Smurf's Roadhog. It was actually primarily Super playing the Roadhog, so you have some interesting similarities there. I imagine Bernard is going to be the Junker Queen for the Spark. We'll see what happens there. I think Smurf probably has the edge in that one. Support line, I think it's pretty equal. Super Rich and Irony versus Vindame and Creative is pretty close, pretty similar. So to me, it really comes down to where I think the the edge is. And it's really tough to say that the Spark are the better DPS line, obviously, when you're competing with Prophet and Fitz or Stalker. But I've been so impressed by Alfie this season and Shy this season that I think they have the edge in that DPS lineup. So overall, I think it's a really, really close matchup between two teams that I think should look pretty good in this meta. But I think that the just pure dominance we've seen from Shy this season on that Ashe and Sojourn, not as much of a carry role in this meta as Sojourn was in the Midseason Madness, but I still think it's very, very important. And I think Shy is the type of high-impact player. We saw that with Aspire in that series between the Vancouver Titans and the Paris Eternal. Aspire was able to get so much work done that it wasn't even close in a lot of ways. It was a good performance from Dove, and Aspire still just completely diffed him. And I think that that's something you really have to kind of consider here. And I think Alfie's Genji, I love Prophet as a player. I think he's a fantastic player. I don't know if there's many heroes that Prophet is the best at. He's just very good at a lot of them. I think Alfie's Genji is above that of Prophet. So I'm going to give the edge to the Hangzhou Spark in this one. Very, very, very interesting one to see. I think it's a good meta for both of these teams. But I think it's particularly strong for the Spark right now. So I think it's going to be close. I'm going to go with a 3-2 finish for this one in favor of the Spark. But I think it'll be a good matchup, of course. And I definitely could see it going either way. Moving on to the Western region for Friday, we have the Vancouver Titans taking on the New York Excelsior. Two teams coming off of their first wins in a while. For the Titans, of course, first win of the season. New York, their first win since they last played Vancouver back in the kickoff clash. So a lot at stake here, a lot on the line for both of these teams. If either of these teams want to make the Summer Showdown, they have to win this game, obviously. It's not necessarily like they can't get in if they don't win this game, but certainly if you are Vancouver and New York, you want to win this game here. Put yourself at 2-1 going into through 3 of your qualifying matches. That's a pretty solid place to be, a pretty solid position to be in. And I think that both of these teams have the opportunity. Neither of their schedules are particularly challenging. New York has to play San Francisco, but the rest of their games, I believe they play like Boston. I think they play Paris. Maybe not Paris, but they play like Boston and Florida. And then the Shock is the other game, right? So they have winnable games, right? If they beat the Titans and they could, potentially beat Boston, potentially beat Florida, that's a good position to be in. The Titans as well do not have the toughest schedule. I think they have to play the LA Gladiators, but outside of that, I think they might also play like Florida and maybe Boston as well. They play the Washington Justice. I know. I don't remember exactly who they play, but they play the Justice. Justice are a new-looking roster. They play the Outlaws, which could be a little tough, and they play the Uprising. So not the Gladiators. I was wrong about that one. But what that tells me is that both these teams have a potential chance to get into the Summer Showdown. It really comes down to this one. These teams are very, very much improved. It's a very hard match to predict. I think it's one of the hardest matches to predict this weekend. It's really hard when you see one good weekend after a lot of bad. And I think it's tough. But I think I've seen a little bit more and a little bit more impressive performances out of New York so far this tournament cycle. They played Houston, who they reverse swept, and Dallas, who they beat, both of which, both Houston and Dallas, beat the LA Gladiators. So these are not like chump teams that New York went up against. Vancouver went up against Toronto, who looked good. I actually think Toronto are a pretty solid team, and it was a pretty close match, that one. And they went up against Paris, who, all the stuff around Paris is, the team knew they were going to get cut, so it was kind of like a whatever type of game. So it's harder to gauge that, but New York played the better opponents. I think they look really, really solid at their peak. I think they look better. I think Yaki, no offense to King, just the higher level player in the Genji role. I think Genji super high impact, and I think that Kellen looked better on the Junker Queen than what we saw out of Mirror. So I'm going to give the edge to New York in this one. I'm going to say 3-1. Definitely could be a 3-2. I think this one can go either way. I think it's a hard one to predict, but I'm going to say New York edges this one out 3-1 over the Vancouver Titans. Moving on to the next match, Boston Uprising take on the San Francisco Shock. Tough one for the Uprising here. Obviously, they had a decent weekend, or should I say a decent win last weekend over the Atlanta Reign, but then They had a very bad loss to the London Spitfire, and I think that it's very tough to look at this Uprising team and think they have a ton of potential to get a big win here. They did add Mag to their roster, of course, getting him from the Washington Justice, so there is a possibility that we see Mag come in and it helps the team kind of improve, bolsters what this team is able to do. I think one of the problems they had is that I think they liked Punk a lot, and there's good reason to like Punk a lot, but one of the biggest issues with Punk is that because he doesn't speak Korean, the team has to comment English when he's in, and the team is better when Punk is in, though the comms are maybe not necessarily better. I think they want to try to clean up the team. I think they look and see Mag potentially as the option who can bring the team together better language-wise, and then they can focus more. Obviously, they did just bring in Seeker, so there's a couple things there, but I think it's going to be tough for Boston to get a win over a Shock team that looks really, really good right now. Not their best meta, and they still look really good, and, it was an almost loss to the Justice, but they still managed to come out on top, so it'll be interesting to see what happens here, but I think the Shock are going to take this one. I think it'll be a pretty one-sided affair. I'm going to say 3-0 Shock over the Uprising. I just don't have enough faith in the Uprising right now to predict them over the Shock of all teams in this tournament. Final match on Friday is the Dallas Fuel versus the Toronto Defiant. I said before I rate Toronto pretty highly. I've seen a lot of people putting Toronto in kind of middle, lower spots on these power rankings. I think they looked pretty good. Their win over Atlanta was very dominant. Atlanta also lost to Boston, so, say what you will. The game against Vancouver is very, very close, but I think Vancouver looks pretty good. I think Toronto should get better as this meta progresses. I think that Hotbot on the Junker Queen, very good. The type of player who you kind of expect to be good in that role. I think Heath has been having a good performance, and I think with Chodong and Twilight in the support line, they have a really solid foundation for this meta and for this tournament cycle, and I think that's one of the things to look at with this team. They're going against Dallas, who I think are in a much better position in the Midseason Madness, in the Summer Showdown than they were in the Midseason Madness, because I think Hanbin is more comfortable on Junker Queen. It's a meta that favors him more. I think the team looks better when he is in. He just has a much higher ceiling. I think his impact on the game is much greater. We've seen Doha and Sparkle with Pop-Off and Genji, and they can put Edison in on the Sojourn or the Ashe, and I think he's looked pretty good when it's not a really hard hit scan meta like we had in the Midseason Madness, where you needed your hit scan to be really, really, really good. So I think these are two really solid teams here. And I think that, support line-wise, also very, very good. I think these are probably the top two rookie main sports we've seen so far this season. You can maybe throw Vindame in there, and Fix has been pretty good as well. Those are definitely my top four rookie main sports of the season, but I'd say Chio and Chodong right now are probably my top two. It's a very interesting matchup to see there. But I do think ultimately that it will go the way of the Dallas Fuel. I think they're the better team right now. It's definitely hard to pick against them when they look as good as they have so far. I think there's a possibility the Defiant take this win if they play well. But I just think that talent-wise, especially in the DPS, I think the Genji... I don't love all those Genji. I think, Sparkle Doha, I think either of them are better than Aldo and the Genji. So, unfortunately, I think that is one of the strengths of the Fuel, or I should say, unfortunately, if you're a Defiant fan, that's one of the strengths of the Fuel. I think it's one of the weaknesses for the Defiant. I think it's going to be a mismatch in that regard. So, I'm going to say pretty close. I think it should be a good series, and these are two good teams. I'm going to say 3-2 in favor of Dallas, but definitely a match that I have my eyes on as one of the better matchups this weekend. Moving on to Saturday, first match, Chengdu Hunters take on the Seoul Dynasty. Another interesting one. Chengdu Hunters in this meta, in theory, should be decent. Jinmu gets to play a hero he's really good at with the Genji. Leave, I haven't been the most impressed with his hit scan performances, but he's not bad by any means. I think that this will definitely come down to how well those two are able to perform. I don't feel great about either tank in a Junker Queen meta, and I think their support line is pretty good, so I definitely think that it comes down to how much of a carry performance the DPS have. You're going against Prophet, you're going up against Fitz or Stalker, you're going up against Smurf. It's a very tough hill to climb for the Hunters, so I think it's going to be tough for them. I think that this meta could be good for them, but the Dynasty are just not the best way to open up and show that. So for me, I'm going to go in favor of the Seoul Dynasty. I'm going to say 3-1. I think Chengdu should take a map. I think they're a good enough team to do that, but I think Seoul's too good. I think they're going to win the series at the end of the day. Moving on to Shanghai Dragons versus the Hangzhou Spark. Another good series here. Tough weekend for the Spark, matching up against the Dynasty. and the Dragons, but that's what the APAC region has become among these top 4 teams. It's a lot of really, really, really good teams playing against each other. There's usually at least 2 good matchups a weekend in the APAC region, which is always really, really nice. This one's tough, once again, because I kind of mentioned before with the Dragons. The tank line is the place where I'm the most concerned, because I don't love either Fate or Void in that aggressive DPS style role. We could potentially see Fleta, like I said. It's getting, who knows where they go. I think the Spark are a little less of a question mark. I kind of know what we're going to get from them, especially when their DPS are just as solid as they come. Not to say the Dragons aren't, but most likely predicting who are you in. They've had most of their success when Fleta was in on DPS. It's kind of like a double-edged sword type of situation here. Spark to have the roster they feel most comfortable with, which is when Bernard is in, if I had to guess. So I think the Spark, I think, have a number of small little advantages that I think will help them in this series. And I think they will be the thing that ultimately tip the series in their favor. But I think this will be a really good series of 2 really good teams. 2 teams I feel very confident in their abilities right now. So I'm definitely going to go in favor of the Spark, but I'm going to say very close series, 3-2 for them over the Shanghai Dragons. Final APAC match Saturday is the Philadelphia Fusion versus the Los Angeles Valiant. Once again, I think it's a good meta for the Fusion. I don't love the Valiant in this meta. I don't love their DPS in this one. Becky's Genji is fine. It's nothing spectacular. They won 1 game with Becky on Genji in the kickoff clash, so take that as you will. Fusion, MM3's had a really good season. I think Zess has had a great season. His Genji looked very good in the kickoff clash. The tanks, we've seen mostly Bellisria, but even when Fury's played, he's looked pretty solid. I've been very impressed by the support line for this team. I think the Valiant support line is still a little bit kind of figuring out what they want to do, who they are, all that type of stuff. So I think it's a good team in some regards, this Valiant roster, but I think the Fusion are better. So I think it's going to be a pretty one-sided affair. I'm going to say 3-0 in favor of the Fusion. I just think they're too much better than the team right now for it to go the way of the Valiant. Moving on to Saturday, Houston Outlaws taking on London Spitfire. Big win for Houston, obviously, over the Gladiators this past weekend, so you have to look at this as a potential big moment for them to try to gain some more footing in the standings, climb up the standings, maybe even a good tournament finish for them. This meta, I think Dante looks pretty good on the role of Junker Queen. Looked better than Doge did when they brought him in. The addition of Lep for the Lucio, I think, has really bolstered this roster as well. So I think the Outlaws are in a good spot. I think they look pretty solid and pretty consistently good. So I feel like they probably will have a nice showing against a Spitfire team that I think is pretty good in this meta. But I'm still not convinced. Their loss to Florida was very one-sided. They did beat Boston, but I think Florida's win really was a surprise considering how good London had looked previously. Maybe they've just, it's a new meta. They'll adjust and they'll get better over time. But I like Houston more right now. I think they're the better team, the more solid team. And so I'm going to go in favor of the Outlaws. I'm going to say 3-1 win for them over the London Spitfire. Second big pick game of the weekend is the LA Gladiators taking on the San Francisco Shock. This has the potential to be a game that is, game of the weekend material. Shock on the hunt for that regular season win streak record of 20. I think they are currently sitting at 18. It's either 17 or 18. But I think this game against the Gladiators is to break the record. I could be wrong, but I think it's to break the record if they beat the Gladiators. Gladiators have been on a skid, obviously losing to Dallas and to Houston, so they want a win over the Shock and prove they can compete at a high level. I haven't been the most impressed with the Gladiators this past week. I didn't think it looked great. There's a story that the reason why Shu was in playing the Sojourn was because Potifon is injured and so he can't really play. If that's the case, of course, then that does change the reasoning for why he's in there. But I don't think it changes necessarily the majority of their problems, which are that Reiner's Junker Queen has not been anything special. And I think that Funny Astro and Skewed had pretty weak showings, all things considered, in this matchup when you consider what they are. You expect them to be really good Lucio. You expect it to be a really good Brigitte, and they just did not really show it. So I think right now it's tough to predict the Gladiators against a Shock team that looks really, really good. I don't think I've predicted against the Gladiators once this season in the regular season, but I got to go with the Shock in this one. I think the Shock are going to take this one. They're going to be close, and then the Gladiators are too good for this to not be a close series. But I'm going to say Shock win this one 3-2 over the LA Gladiators. Final match on Saturday is the Florida Mayhem against the Washington Justice. Really tough match to call in this one because we don't know what the state of the Justice is other than they don't have Mag anymore. Tons of rumors, tons of reports about this team that I will likely talk about tomorrow in a video, assuming that by the time tomorrow rolls around, or at least, some point today when this video is coming up, we actually get more news about the Justice and news about their roster releases, considering today is the deadline for all that type of stuff. Hopefully we'll know what the state of the Justice is before Friday, so I can talk about it a little bit more. But it's tough to really to know what's going to happen here, so I'm literally taking a shot in the dark in this one. Who knows what it's going to be? I'm just going to say 3-0 for the Mayhem. I don't know what the Justice roster is going to be. I don't know what the state of the team is. I thought they looked good with Mag, even without, even with the mostly the same roster and no Mag. I still don't think it's going to be a very good showing from them, so I'm going to say 3-0 for the Mayhem. Moving on to Sunday, Guangzhou Charge versus the LA Valiant. Charge roster, I really like what they did. Honestly, I think with Choi Se-won and Krong in as, really good star players, no more splitting time at the tank with Krong and Rio, just Krong, improvement in the hit scan roll, improvement in the back line. I think the Charge are a better team right now than they were a month ago. I think that is not even just better. I think they're significantly better. I think the Valiant really are not anything special right now. I think that they hit a bit of a stride, end of the kickoff clash, beginning of the midseason madness, and then they fell off again. I think Charge right now should be the better team. I think the meta favors them more, so I'm going to say Charge take this one 3-1. Just feels more right. Final APAC match of the week is the Philadelphia Fusion versus the Chengdu Hunters. These two teams have been close when they played this season. I think Chengdu has beaten Philly both times they've played, so something to make note of. But as I mentioned before, interesting meta for these teams. Chengdu, I don't feel great about their tank situation or their support situation, support situation, I don't feel like it's anything spectacular. I don't necessarily think that their DPS situation is better than the Fusion's right now. I just feel the Fusion have a little bit more of a concrete identity. They know what they're doing better. I think they're a little more kind of focused, and they've figured their roster out better than the Hunters have. The Hunters, I still think, have limitations without a dedicated hit scan player. And so for me, got to favor the Fusion in this one, but it's been a very close series amongst these teams so far this season. So I'm going to say it's pretty close and give the advantage to the Fusion 3-2. Moving on to the Western region. Boston Uprising, Dallas Fuel. Come on, man. Dallas look really, really good. Boston look average. So I think you have to give the Fuel credit here. I think the Fuel should win this one pretty easily. They have been significantly better than the Uprising so far. And I think that it's going to be an easy 3-0 win for them because it's just what you would expect from a Fuel Uprising series, and that's just how much better they are right now. Next is the Paris Eternal versus the Atlanta Reign. Paris Eternal, obviously, major changes to their roster. Cut all their European players, held on to Wub and Dove, and then brought in a bunch of new players from Odyssey, Luke Mino, Rack Attack. I don't remember the other two's names. I feel really, really bad. But new roster for this Eternal squad that was not performing well. Might be an interesting look from them, considering that this is a very strong roster from contenders. The majority of it coming from Odyssey, which just won contenders in the West. Of course, Krawi is the other player, not from Odyssey, coming in the tank role, and then Malthol coming in as the third DPS player, which I'm glad they have a third DPS player finally. More flexibility on this roster, I think it's pretty good for them. It's hard to necessarily say for sure how it's going to go, though, because I think Paris is in a weird spot. It's a new roster. They haven't really fully played together yet. Atlanta's really, really talented. I think this Paris team will be better than they were, but I don't think right now they're at a point to beat Atlanta, even though Atlanta struggled. So I'm just going to say 3-0 Atlanta. This is a tough one because I don't know what to expect from these teams yet this week, but I'm going to say Atlanta take this one. Final match of the weekend is the LA Gladiators versus the Toronto Defiant. This could be a really good series as well. I think the Defiant look very good right now. I think the Gladiators look a little iffy right now. And I think that that is a great recipe for a good game. I think that this should be one that, if you're the Gladiators, you can't go 2-4 or anything like that. So you have to win this game, especially if you lose to the Shock. You cannot lose after a, potentially 0-3 start. The Doomium would be so bad. I think the Gladiators are still the better roster than the Defiant. The Gladiators have had a very tough start to this tournament cycle. They're not losing to bad teams. They're not losing to Boston. They're not losing to New York. They're also Dallas and the Outlaws. You can give them a pass. It's not the end of the world. They're dealing with some issues behind the scenes, obviously, with Potifon's injury. So I think the Gladiators should take it. I think they're the better team right now. I'm going to give them the edge in this one. I think it'll be pretty close, though. I'm going to say 3-2 for the Gladiators. Definitely could be a good series, but I think right now Gladiators should take it. But I'm going to give credit to the Defiant. They've looked good, so 3-2 for the Gladiators. So that's it for my picks this week. I'll throw them up real quick. You can take a look at them. Full picks in all their glory. But that is going to be all for me for this video. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more like it in the future. Comment down below your thoughts on this week's matches. If there's any picks you disagree with, or there's one you really, really agree with, let me know down below. But that's going to be all for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.